Welcome to Module 3. In the last module we learned about the different research paradigms, and in this module, Module 3, we'll be talking more about some specific research design concepts. So starting in Chapter 7, one of the concepts we're talking about is sampling. And sampling is basically how are we obtaining the participants or whatever entity or idea that we are capturing from the population so that we can study it. So the sample should represent the population so that research findings can be generalized. That is, we want to be able to study the sample and then generalize or apply our findings to that population that we sampled from. There are two different sampling techniques that we'll be reading about in Chapter 7. One is random sampling. And in this type of sampling, every case or unit of observation, many times this is an individual in social scientific research, has an equal chance of being included in the sample. Non-random sampling techniques are just that, they're not random. And don't think that random means haphazard, it means a systematic process of selection. So non-random samplings are primarily based on convenience, and you'll read more about those techniques in Chapter 7. To give you an example of some research that I'm conducting right now, I'm studying work-life balance, and work-life balance is basically what strategies do we use or messages do we send about the ways that we balance our work life and our home life or family, friends, school life, that sort of thing. So I'm conducting a study right now and collected some data from CSUSB undergraduates, and I did this through the psychology department's SONA system, and some of you may have participated in some research through that program. And so this is a non-random sample, so I won't be able to apply my findings to all of the undergraduates at Cal State because they weren't each student did not have an equal chance of being selected into my sample. Another concept we'll be talking about in Chapter 7 are levels of measurement, and we operationalize our data through measurement. So it's basically how are we going to measure the concept that we're interested in studying. So in my research example, if I'm interested in studying work-life balancing, how am I going to measure that concept? And there are two different broad types of levels of measurement, categorical and continuous. Categorical data can come in the form of nominal or ordinal levels of measurement, and a second type, continuous data, can come in the form of interval or ratio levels of measurement. A Likert type response would be something that you're very familiar with in survey research, and these might be you're responding to sentences or statements where you're responding on this scale of very often to never, or very positive to very negative, completely agree to completely disagree, strongly agree to strongly disagree. So you're probably very familiar with those Likert type responses, and those are an example of interval levels of measurement. So now let me give you an example from my research of the different levels of measurement that I might employ, again in the work-life balancing example. So nominal level of data could be the types of messages that people send. So one of the things that we did in our study was we were asking participants, what messages do you remember sending about the ways that you balance your work and family life? So these are some examples. People might express appreciation, something like, I don't feel as stressed as I used to about getting it all done because I have you guys. People might set boundaries, so things like, what I do outside of work does not concern what I do when I'm at work. Or another example might be stress and frustration. So I can't handle all of this, it's so stressful, I feel like I don't have time to study. You can probably guess that that came from a student. So these are nominal data, meaning that they're in name only, they're categorical, so we're placing these different messages into these different categories or types of messages. Now, let's say if an example of ordinal level of measurement in my research might be, an ordinal level of measurement is when we're ranking something. So I might rank the items that contribute to my work-life stress. And so if I give you a list of things like children, the number of hours that you work, whether or not you work full or part-time, how far your commute is, those sorts of things. And if I gave you a list of 5 and I asked you to rank them from 1 being the most stressful to 5 being the least stressful, that would be an example of an ordinal level of measurement. Another example using these levels of measurement would be interval, and here we might have a work-life family stress scale. And so here are 5 statements that you would respond to using some of the items that I showed you before. So for example, number 1, the demands of my work interfere with my home and family life. And so we'd ask you on a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree, where do you fall on that 5-point scale? Or the amount of time my job takes up makes it difficult to fulfill family responsibilities. So again, you'd respond on that same scale of 1 to 5. And so that's an example of an interval level of measurement. And then lastly, an example of a ratio level of measurement. Ratio is similar to interval. The main difference is that there's a true 0 in that scale. So that means that that concept or idea does not exist. So we might ask people, what are the number of hours of work that you do at home? And so that could be 0 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever the case might be. Now, moving on to chapter 8, this is about evaluating research, and this is broken down into the different paradigms that we talked about in the earlier, in module 2. So this is about how do we decide whether or not this is good research, whether or not these findings should apply to other situations, whether or not it should be published. So if we're talking about social scientific research, we're looking at things like precision, power. Parsimony deals with, are we being straightforward in the way we're explaining things? Is it reliable? So am I using a measurement instrument that's going to be consistent each time I use it? Or is the research valid? And so what this means is that, is the instrument measuring what we intend it to measure? So in my example of the work-life stress scale, it's valid if it is measuring what we intend it to measure, that being work-life stress. And in chapter 8 you'll see some different examples of ways to establish reliability and validity. Then in another paradigm, we can look at how do we strengthen interpretive research. So here you'll be reading about different ideas like, is the topic worthy of study? Is it rigorous? Is the research credible? Do the findings resonate with the population that you're studying? So if I'm studying, for example, people who are trying to balance work and family life, do my findings resonate or ring true to the people that I'm studying? Am I making a significant contribution to the literature? Am I following ethical guidelines that we talked about in chapter 2? And is there coherence, or do my findings hang together, say, with the theory that I'm studying? So in chapter 9 we'll be looking at hypotheses and research questions, and both of these concepts help us to narrow the focus of our studies. So research questions are more general, they tend more to be found in interpretive or qualitative research, and they help us focus our study. Hypotheses are more likely found in social scientific or quantitative research, and these are statements, so this is sort of basic information. Hypotheses are statements, whereas research questions are grammatically questions. So hypotheses are statements that 2 or more concepts or ideas are related or differ in some way. And so we can talk about the null hypothesis, which states that there's no relationship or no difference between those concepts, or the research hypothesis that states that there is a difference between those concepts or that they're related. Let me give you an example from my research, again with work-life balance. So if I was asking a research question, it might be simply, what strategies do people use to balance their work and family lives? So these strategies could be talking to coworkers, talking to my spouse, setting boundaries between work and family life. And then another example of a hypothesis could be people who use more cooperative strategies experience less work-life stress. And so the 2 concepts here in this hypothesis would be the strategies that are used, in this case cooperative strategies, and then the other concept would be work-life stress. So those are the two variables in this hypothesis. And this is the research hypothesis, and it is directional, meaning that I'm saying that people who use more cooperative strategies experience less work-life stress. And so I'm saying the direction that that relationship will go in. Then the corresponding null hypothesis, so every research hypothesis has a null hypothesis, and that would be that there's no relationship between strategy type and work-life stress. Then the last chapter in Module 3 is Chapter 6 on literature reviews, and I think this is a helpful chapter in terms of organizing your writing and understanding the purpose of the lit review in any journal article that you read. And so really the purpose of the literature review is to explain how your research contributes to the field, in this case the field of communication, and connect your research to previous studies that have been done. So in my case on work-family stress, I'm trying to link what I'm doing to the prior research that's been done in this area. This chapter will also give you some ideas on how to organize your writing. So to close up, some of the tasks that need to be completed for Module 3 include obviously reading chapters 7, 9, 8, and 6 in the textbook, watch the related video material for each chapter, answer one of the 3 discussion questions in Module 3, and remember you just need to either post an original response to my question or post a response to one of your fellow classmates. And then complete quizzes 2, 3, and 4 for Module 3. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is submit portion A of the research proposal. And let me just say a little bit about portion A of the research proposal. So you've seen in the syllabus that you're building on this paper throughout the term. In the first portion, you're going to be developing a research idea based upon a theory that you discussed in COMM 306. So this can be any theory of your choosing. It could be social exchange theory, cultivation theory, any of the theories that were of interest to you in COMM 306. Then you're going to write one research question or one hypothesis based on that idea. So make sure that this is clearly identified in your text. So use the notations like I have here. RQ for research question. An example might be, what is the effect of viewing violent R-rated movies? And so this could be something that's related to cultivation theory. Or you might choose to write a hypothesis and say something like there's a positive relationship between viewing violent R-rated movies and the use of an aggressive conflict style. The last part of this portion A is to provide a rationale for your study, and Chapter 8 provides some examples of how you might build up the rationale for your study. Essentially what you're wanting to do is tell me, why is this an important topic for us to do research on, or for you to do research on. This portion A, is 2 to 3 pages in length, and that obviously does not include title page or reference page. So please, if you have any questions about completing portion A of the paper, either post them to the discussion board, class questions discussion board, or send me an email directly.